Some people claim that Christianity and politics shouldn't mix. Here's what they're missing. Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Now, this is a bit of a unique podcast. I encourage parents and teens or preteens to listen together, discuss the ideas that we're going to discuss. And on this podcast, we talk openly about the best ideas of the political left and non-believers. We don't need to be afraid of those ideas. We don't have to pretend that there's no appeal to those ideas, but we do need to prepare our teens and preteens to deal with the destructive messages that are so pervasive in our culture. And remember, if you want to watch, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpeningarrows, youtube.com/@sharpeningarrows. Well, I'm very excited today to have Tim Goeglein joining the show. Tim, welcome.
It's great to be with you, Victor. Thanks for allowing me to come on and spend a little time with you.
Of course. And before we jump into it, I just want to share a little bit about Tim. He's the Vice President of External and Government Relations for Focus on the Family, which is such a great organization. Tim previously served as a special assistant to President George W. Bush. He's the author of several books, including Stumbling Toward Utopia, Toward a More Perfect Union, and his latest book, What Really Matters. And he's someone who combines Christianity and politics on a daily basis. Tim, one of the things, the unique things about this podcast is we always talk about the best ideas for the positions that we disagree with. And so I'll lay it out on a couple of issues and then ask you to talk about what's appealing about this position, and then what doesn't make sense, what's wrong with this position. So the first topic I want to talk about today is the idea that you can't legislate morality. And actually, when I went to college, I went to Hillsdale College, great school, but I had an economics professor who talked about this very concept. Just because something's legal doesn't mean it's legitimate. Just because something's illegitimate doesn't mean it should be illegal. And this was the idea, is that you can't legislate morality. It's too personal. It's too intrusive. Are you going to arrest a toddler for stealing candy? Everyone would be in jail if we arrested people for lying. And legislating morality is kind of an invitation to big government, which we definitely don't want. So Tim, before I ask you just about that argument, what's something that you find appealing about that argument?
The thing that I find appealing about the argument is that if I tried to walk across the street from my office at Focus on the Family here in Washington, D.C., and to say to all my friends in the Republican caucus in the Senate, or all my Democratic friends, in their caucus, and I have plenty of friends on both sides, said with humility, or the same in the House a few blocks away, they would all be very puzzled by that, Victor, because they would know that it's untrue, which is to say that anyone who asserts that the federal government or state, local, regional government doesn't legislate morality, by the way, is not stupid. That's not the argument that I would ever make. I would argue that anybody who would argue that position has not spent much time in the public square. To ring the bell backwards, the fact is we legislate morality every single day. It takes place at what you and I and many people who agree and disagree with us would say is worldview. It's what you bring to the public debate. For instance, 1/3 of all of our judicial nominees at a federal level have now been nominated and confirmed by President Trump. That's a giant number. If you have voted for a nominee or against a nominee, directly, indirectly, you're voting for an ethical worldview. Because, for instance, just 2 weeks ago, the United States Supreme Court issued two gigantically important rulings on the issue of trans people. That to me, by the way, people of goodwill, left and right, would say that's a moral issue. The Supreme Court in the same week issued a major ruling on so-called birthright citizenship. People of goodwill on both sides would say that's an ethical issue. We are debating in a major way, as you know, Victor, whether to defund Planned Parenthood for a second fiscal year. People of goodwill, both sides of the aisle would say that is a moral issue. So, people of goodwill on both sides can have big views on the biggest issues, and both agree that we legislate morality almost every day at every level of the government.
So, if what you're saying is true, and I do believe it is true that laws are based on morality. We have this worldview, as you mentioned. Everyone has a worldview, and it informs the decisions they make, the votes they cast, the rulings they make on the judicial bench. Why has there been this push to separate Christianity, that a clear source of morality, a historical source of morality, from the public square?
By that question because I would offer that the most important and the most dominant problem in 21st century America, and I write about this at length in my new book, What Really Matters, is I believe categorically, with no equal or peer, that the biggest issue in 21st century America is a spiritual crisis of the first order. In fact, I would argue that it's I'll use two weather analogies. Most of the time, it's an earthquake, and other times, it's a tsunami. And it is powered by a profound moral relativism, which I think, Victor, directly relates to that first great question, which is that if you do not believe that there is objectively a right and a wrong, a good and an evil, if you do not believe that, then if you come to Congress or you come to a state legislature or you come to the Oval Office and happen to be, of either party in any time, elected to office, and you hold that kind of relativistic view, then you're going to nominate, confirm, legislate, speak in a particular way. Personnel is policy. You are likely, especially in positions, cabinet positions, a host of other nominations, you're likely to choose people who share that dominant worldview. So it seems to me that with a moral relativism so often flaming itself in the public square, we have to deal with this strongly. And this is why I wrote What Really Matters, and it's why I wrote Stumbling Toward Utopia, because in my view, people of goodwill, and I hope I've said that enough to be
Definitely.
convincing. Yeah, but I think this is the point of the narrative that you're getting at so brilliantly, which is that my view is that taxes, borders, wars, they matter a lot. Of course they do, and they're moral questions. But in my view, and the reason I wrote What Really Matters is because the political class is ginger when it comes around speaking about what really matters: family, marriage, parenting, human life, religious liberty, conscience rights, parental rights, pronouns with objective meanings. I mean, this goes, Victor, to the heart of this wonderful conversation. Why are we being so sheepish at every level of politics, public policy, and culture, theology, legal, the media, about what really matters? These first institutions will determine the future of our country. I hope I argue it as strongly as I can.
And I want to talk about the Christian side of this in a little bit, but before I do that, you've talked about the moral relativism that's certainly been pushed by our culture, and you're seeing in the halls of Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about the worldview of the left? If you don't have even a belief in objective truth, what makes up the worldview that you're seeing on a daily basis in Washington D.C. from the left?
For 10 years, I worked in the United States Senate. For 8 years, I worked at the White House. And for the last 18 years, as the vice president of Focus on the Family, all living and working inside the swamp. That's a lot of years. And categorically, in all that time, I have spent an immeasurably large amount of my life, my profession, my vocation, with people on the left. I would say people who are Marxists, socialists, progressive, establishment Democrats, all of these derivations broadly defined of the left. And I feel quite confident that Pat Moynihan, the late U.S. Senator, a Democrat and a man of the left himself, was absolutely correct, Victor, when he said that the primary difference between people of the left and people of the right, broadly defined, is that people on the right believe that if you want to impact the course of the country, you have to impact culture first. And people on the left primarily believe that if you want to impact the course of the country, you have to impact politics first. And I think Pat Moynihan got that profoundly right, as did my late great friend Breitbart. That politics, he said, is downstream from culture. I used to say to him, that I believed that that was true, but I also believed that culture and politics were downstream from things of the spirit, religion, faith, things of the spirit. That is really those things, those big ideas are the things, in my view, Victor, that ultimately drive or navigate the course of a great or a failed nation.
Let me ask you one more question on this before I want to talk about the separation of church and state, because I think this is really important. I think you'll have a great perspective on it. You've worked for decades in Washington D.C. What we see with judicial nominees or other people who are elected to go to Washington D.C. is if they're around uh, the swamp, they're around the peer pressure, they oftentimes start drifting to the left. What kept you on the political right? What kept you as an outspoken Christian? And what advice would you have for teens or preteens as they think maybe perhaps about going to a secular college, another environment where they will be severely outnumbered in their beliefs? How did you stay true to your faith?
Yeah, two big things. The first thing is faith itself. It seems to me that if you are a serious Christian, you take your relationship with God seriously and you allow God to navigate your life. It seems to me that you ultimately have to come up with particular conclusions about the biggest things in life, and you have to come up with particular conclusions about what you and I might think are the less important things in life that ultimately end up being very important. So I would say the first thing that has guided me, and I'm honored that you would ask, all these years has been my Christianity. I am a practicing serious Christian, and I think that my relationship with Jesus Christ is the thing that steers my life. The second thing, however, is very related, and that is in Washington, I believe that personnel is policy, which is to say, the people you surround yourself with, the people who become your closest friends. It's not that you have an ideological litmus test. I have extremely close friends on the right and extremely close friends on the left, and I enjoy my friendship with them truly equally. But when it comes to the things that you and I are speaking about, the things that really matter, it seems to me if you're in an environment that is aggressively secular, very progressive, and ultimately looks to politics to solve the biggest issues of life, it seems to me you would be cast astern. And I'm a sailor. If you allowed the whims of the everyday to guide you, and it's true. We used to call it Potomac fever. Maybe it's the same thing. The fear of not being invited to particular cocktail parties. However, I found Washington to be a really great place to live, even as a Christian and as a conservative. And I get invited to plenty of parties, and some I say yes to, and some I say no to, and some I know I'm not invited to because of my views. And sometimes I'm invited maybe because of my views, but surrounded by people who don't agree with me. So I think of it as a circus maximus sometimes, but faith and your closest family and friends, boy, they are absolutely key, in my view, to a good and a way to live your life.
That's terrific. And teens, I really want to hone in on this because, here's someone who has worked in politics for decades, who's thought deeply about these issues. And what is he saying? He's saying you're also a person. And this is what you have to understand about people who go to colleges is it's oftentimes it's not just, oh, it's this intellectual argument that gets me to leave the faith or leave my political beliefs. It's the people you are around. We talk about ideas. We want to unpack ideas on this show, but remember, you are a person, and people are influenced by other people, not just ideas in the abstract. Tim, I really appreciate that, and I want to kind of circle back to this idea of Christianity and politics. And of course, the first objection you're going to hear if you ever bring this up is, well, we have to have the separation of church and state. This has been kind of a reflexive belief over the last few decades. I think many Christians believe this. I think many pastors believe this, that, well, yeah, of course I'm a Christian, but we have to have the separation of church and state. What would you say in response to someone who said this?
I would say that you ought to read the only book that Thomas Jefferson ever wrote. He was 33 when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, but his book on the conscience and religious liberty is an absolute masterpiece. And of course, the reason I begin there, Victor, is because the famous letter by Jefferson to the Baptist congregation in Connecticut that began this whole use of the phrase separation of church and state is always misinterpreted and therefore misapplied in the debate that we're having. Because in that letter to the Baptists in Connecticut, and I think this is extremely important because the overwhelming majority of Baptist pastors in the founding era spent at least a little bit of time incarcerated or in jail for their views. So it's not just that a Baptist congregation wants to know Thomas Jefferson's views. They have a serious reason for asking, is this place religiously free? Is our conscience free? That's the derivation of this letter. And Jefferson is not in any manner saying that there's no role for faith or religion in public life. I've read this letter, numerous times, written about it, debated about it, been on panels about it, spoken at length to large numbers of progressives about it who hold a fundamentally different, misapplied view, in my view. Which is that Jefferson is saying in the American experience, it's government that has to stay out of the church. It's government that needs to stay out of this realm of life. And I think that that's a very important thing to say and to assert. I think Jefferson was exactly right. By the way, it's important to say, Victor, as well, that Jefferson had plenty of adversaries and enemies in American politics in his own time. I mean, he had a break in a friendship with John Adams that lasted 15 years. These men had been incredibly close friends. So it wasn't that, that everybody agreed with Jefferson on everything. But the reason I mention it, Victor, is that the overwhelming majority of Americans in the founding, I mean, like with almost no comparison, left, right, center, they agreed with Jefferson on this question.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to go back and read the founding documents and read the founding fathers themselves, and to hear how overt they are with Christianity and talking about how Christianity informed the founding, and to kind of circle back to that conversation about worldview and truth. I think what we've seen with the Supreme Court, especially, is when you don't have a belief in absolute truth, then a document like the Constitution becomes something where you just you go back and you find something, and you reference this, but that phrase, the separation of church and state, is not in the Constitution. It's in a letter that one of the founding fathers wrote while he was president, and the Supreme Court, again, the justices, not being grounded by absolute truth, in my opinion, go back and they find this, and they talk about it so much, and it serves the purposes of the left so well that now I think many people do believe it's in the Constitution. Let me ask you a different question on that. If we talk about, well, the state shouldn't have a role in religion, and Christianity is so important to America's founding, and I think even to the future of the country, what do you think about Islam in America? And you've got this ideology that it says it's a religion. You can one of the biggest religions in the world, but you also have people here who are Islam who, very clearly do not want America to continue to be America. Does religious freedom mean the government has no role in looking to the future and looking to what happened in Europe, as the rise of of Islam there has led to a decrease in freedoms.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the salient and most important, largest historical questions in the American experience of the 21st century. Because overwhelmingly, and I do mean overwhelmingly, the United States of America was founded by dissenting Protestants. That's almost impossible to debate. Categorically, there were remarkable exceptions, but overwhelmingly, dissenting Protestants founded the United States of America. It's also true, and must be said almost in the same breath, that overwhelmingly the founding generation made a large swath, and rightfully so, for the kind of pluralism that supports a constitutional democracy. They were ultimately comfortable, as I said a moment ago, with including the Baptists, the Danbury Baptists. There's the dissenting Protestants again. George Washington, the father of our country, wrote an extremely important letter to the oldest Jewish congregation in Rhode Island. That letter is a must read for anybody who cares about this conversation that we are having. And from the earliest of years, American Catholics were warmly welcomed into this country. One of our most prominent founding fathers of the Carroll family, felt overwhelmingly that he and his family and fellow Catholics were included. And what the Judaic Christian tradition that I'm describing, broadly defined, has in common is that for all the very important, and they are important, theological distinctions, ultimately they welcome and are commodious with a constitutional republic. So it is when you go outside of the 40-yard lines and of a moment, you have worldviews that are in opposition to freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom in general, ultimately traditions that are not commodious or in sync with the United States Constitution. It is at that point that a country, a culture, a civilization rightfully says, we are concerned about discord. We are concerned about decadence. We are concerned about planting the seeds in the soil of America that could ultimately upend and ruin our freedom. So it seems to me we have to treat very seriously and very specifically any and all threats in this regard that could ultimately impinge on American liberty and freedom in the next generation.
Oh, that's so well said. And I think, for those who are listening, teens and preteens, this is going to be a battle that's going to be fought over the decades. And you should feel confident in knowing that, no, we do not have to extend the rights that we hold so dear to people who are going to use those rights to destroy those rights for future generations. We're not obligated to do that. And I think you've said that so well. Let me actually kind of reframe this conversation about a different type of objection to Christians in politics. Some people will say, some Christians will say, and Christ said to make disciples, not Republicans. Getting involved in politics is a distraction to Christians from their most important obligation, which is to convert people to follow the Lord. What do you think is appealing about this argument, and how would you respond to it?
Well, it's interesting. I am a cradle Lutheran, and you may know, Victor, and people who are watching or listening to us may or may not know that the very first speaker of the United States House of Representatives was a Lutheran pastor who also happened to be a very effective member, in the Revolutionary military. Muhlenberg, Speaker Muhlenberg, the very prominent Muhlenberg family, one of the first families in the United States, they would have found this a very perplexing thing because, as with George Washington, as with Benjamin Rush, the most prominent doctor in the entire founding, a very serious evangelical Christian from Pennsylvania. I could go on and on. The 39 people who signed the Declaration of Independence, what is it, 56 who signed the Constitution? If they were your guests on this program, Victor, they would have given you, I'm sure, a better answer than me, but it would have been commodious with the fact that there is no opposition to faith in the public square. In the American experience, faith and public life are not decoupled or divorced, they are of a piece. And this is the most direct way I think that I can say it. I've written about it in What Really Matters, my new book. I've written about it, I've spoken about it, and I'm eager to say it again, which is that the founders believed in the American experience that if you actually wanted to have liberty and freedom over time, I mean, not cut off at the knees in a short way. And by the way, many of them had very great doubts, grave doubts, that America would ever live to be beyond 50 years old, much less 250 years, which I think is so celebratory and a great achievement of this beloved country. But what they believe, Victor, is that if you want to have freedom and liberty over time, you had to have moral excellence in the citizens and in the leaders. And they wrote about, they spoke about, they advocated for the view that moral excellence, otherwise called virtue, that if you wanted moral excellence and virtue in the citizens and in the leaders, then you had to foster and make room for the Judaic Christian tradition that I advocated just a moment ago, because they knew there was no national church, no established religion, no religious test for public office. But they wanted the little platoons, to borrow a phrase from Edmund Burke, they wanted the little platoons, civil society, to absolutely thrive. And they knew that in this monumental work of reclamation and revival in the constitutional republic, that they wanted to plant seeds of faith and religion. They wrote about it, spoke about it, famous letters, the farewell address from George Washington, the letters to the Massachusetts militia by John Adams, great speeches, great remarks by Benjamin Franklin, among many, many others. All of them agreed on what we're talking about.
So we can see the importance of Christianity to the country, to the government. What
Yes.
should pastors, what should churches themselves be doing to encourage this?
May I say, of all the things we're talking about, this is the one that I love the most. My favorite writer is F. Scott Fitzgerald. He said, "Character is action." Here's my view, Victor. My view is that this is the time for the church in America to engage as never before. I believe very strongly, in fact, to the depth of my being, that we would not have had a successful American Revolution. We would not have had a union, and a successful one, after the Civil War. We would not have had suffrage. We would not have had the abolition of the slave trades. We would not have had the civil rights movement. Any of those things without the role of the church. The church is absolutely the most important spiritual, cultural component that is baked into the DNA of our beloved country from the beginning. Pastors, priests, rabbis, it's important that they step into the public square. Of course, the church is strongest when it's the church. The church is not government. Government is not the church. We must never conflate those. God Himself gave us the church, government, and the family, the great institutions. They are separate and distinct, but they work together for the common good. That's the common narrative here. So the church definitively has a role, and even I would argue as never before.
I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of wisdom there. Let me end on this. In your latest book, as you've mentioned, What Really Matters, you detail the breakdown of marriage and the family, the decline of American education, attacks on faith, increased political polarization, and how all of these factors have put us in national peril. Hearing this, definitely true, but it can be really discouraging for a teenager or preteen. When I was in high school, there was all of this fear about Y2K, and that the world was ending with when the year 2000 came and the computers didn't know what the date was. And
Yes.
I just remember as a kid feeling like, okay, well, this is not great. And there's nothing I can do. Like, I am completely powerless to fix Y2K. I just have to kind of wait and see what happens. So let me ask you a more practical question here. What are a couple of things that teenagers, many of whom can't vote, can do because of these realities, to combat these realities?
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to say two things, and they're directly related, but they're in sync. They're bookended. The first thing is that I am an inveterate optimist. I believe that overwhelmingly America's best days are in front of us. Why do I believe that? Because I believe that discouragement and despair is a kind of sin because it negates hope. I'm a Christian. I believe that despair and discouragement negates the hope of Jesus Christ. But I know that I'm speaking to and being heard by people who may be people of faith, but they're not Christians. I still believe that paradigm applies at one level because discouragement and despair is a negation. It is a kind of malevolence. It's the kind of thing that is like a cancer. And the thing is, if people are discouraged and despair and not having a sense of hope, they can look at perfectly healthy institutions, and I think we have a lot of them, and they can begin to see dark clouds over them. So it seems to me in the dominant culture fosters this view, the one that you described a moment ago. But in fact, this is a remarkable country with remarkable things happening now and remarkable things happening just ahead. Giving one example, Artemis. I thought that was one of the brightest spots in the American experience just in the last 24 months. And I think building upon Artemis, both things on this side of outer space and that side of outer space, is actually quite exciting. So I think that that's the first thing to say, that hope is objectively real. And I think there are really marvelous days ahead. The second thing is the following. Is restoration possible? The answer is definitively yes. We have been broken and polarized in our history. In the American founding, Victor, which we've talked a lot about, 1/3 of Americans supported the revolution, but 1/3 were for the British or totally indifferent. That's major polarization. The Civil War, 700,000 people were killed. That's polarization. And it was never clear that we were going to keep the country together. Two world wars, the Cold War. You know what? America has come through. We have proven that regeneration, renewal, and restoration is possible to defeat discord and decadence. So I believe very strongly and categorically that this is an exceptional country. I believe it's divinely ordained and that we have a call from all of history to do great things. And I'm very confident that our best days are ahead. And I believe that especially with the rising generation of young men and women.
Well, I appreciate that note of optimism and appreciate all of your insight. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a real joy. Thank you so much, Victor.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, remember to subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpening arrows. Be courageous like Charlie, stay sharp, and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.